Today's scripture is from the book of Matthew, chapter 17, verses 10 through 21. And his disciples asked him, "Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus answered, saying to them, "Elijah will come first, so that everything might be fulfilled. But I say to you, Elijah has already come, and they do not know him. And they did not know him, and they did to him whatever they pleased. Thus also the Son of Man is bound to suffer from them." Then the disciples understood what had been told them was about John the Baptist. And when they came to the people, a man approached him and fell on his knees and said to him, "My Lord, have mercy on me. My son is an epileptic and has become worse. He often falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, but they were not able to heal him." Jesus answered, saying, "O faithless and crooked generation, how long shall I be with you? And how long shall I preach to you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon went out of him, and the boy was healed from that very hour. Then the disciples came up to Jesus when he was alone and said to him, "Why could we not heal him?" Jesus said to them, "Because of your unbelief. For truly I say to you, if there is faith in you, even as a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move away from here,' and it will move away, and nothing would prevail over you. Nevertheless, this kind does not come out except by fasting and prayer." And so ends the reading for today. And now Dr. Lyle will give us our sermon lesson for this morning.
The title of our lesson sermon today is With God. And it's a lesson sermon title used by Dr. Bassell somewhere back in the 50s. And I had an opportunity to look at and read and consider. Certainly a very interesting concept for us in our lives, and I think one that we do not pay sufficient attention to, is the concept of being with God. I think there is a growth that takes place in the human spirit, and at what I would call some of the beginning stages, people have a basic overall belief in God, and they give homage or respect to that idea periodically by going to church, periodically by having an expression on their lips concerning God during their lifetime. But most of their thought pattern has to do with their daily lives and the things that they do each day, how they're reacting with their fellow man who's mad at them, who's happy with them, who they're angry with, who they're happy with, the events that perturbed them, the joys that they have, the families. Their lives seem to be very, very what I would call involved in the physical emotional world, which most of the human race is involved with. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that, because it is a particular level of consciousness, and it is something that we all face. Later on, as one progresses through their spiritual life, they become more concerned, I think, about the things of the world, and perhaps maybe it's the impending thought of the afterlife or something like that. And they begin thinking more and more concerning God. There are others that are on the planet that just seem to be concerned about the concept of God, the influence of God in their lives and our lives all the time. 24 hours a day. And it is those people, I think, that are closer to God. And that does not mean that they don't have all of the rest of the things that people seem to think are life or part of life: family, relationships, employers, homes, automobiles, whatever it is, how they get along with their fellow man. It matters not how close or how far you are from God, that we have these relationships. The only difference is how the relationships are perceived, and whether or not they're perceived through a God force or through that idea of God being with us, and they're accepted that way, or whether they're perceived as something separate from, that when there's a problem, then we turn and go to God. For all of us, I think it is best for us to be continually closer to God. One of the examples that Dr. Bassell gave in his lesson sermon was the example of Lazarus, and Lazarus being raised from the tomb, or raised from the dead. And one of the women had come to him and said, you know, if you'd only been here a little sooner, you could have saved him. And, you know, Jesus replied to her concerning her faith or her belief, is that certainly at that point in time that Lazarus, that they perceived Lazarus as to be gone out of their life, they had themselves become absent from or detached from God, because they felt this loss, this grief, and they felt that something was gone out of their lives that could not be replaced. And they weren't thinking of their relationship with God at that particular point in time. Where Jesus never left that thought, and this is one of the wonderful stories in Scripture because of the fact that he never left that thought, that he maintained the thought of being with God, maintained the thought of life, maintained the thought of love, maintained the concept that Lazarus was with them and continued to be with them because of that connection with God. And it was through that connection with God, through that closeness with God, he was able to maintain the closeness with Lazarus. And then, of course, having the expression of gratitude that went with the experience at the time, was able to call Lazarus forth from the grave. And one of the things that we don't look at, when we look at that scripture, we look at it as a wonderful story, and we look at it having to do with the power of gratitude and the power of belief. But Jesus' belief at that point was past the mere faith element. He was way past that, all the way into the point of knowledge. He knew God more than anyone else present on the planet at that time. And because of his knowledge of the Father and his closeness to the Father, there were many things that he was able to do that others were not able to do. We know in our scripture that we read today that there's an experience here that took place just before the scripture, and that was the Transfiguration on the Mount.